Venture capital is a relationship business. You are trying to sell something. You're trying to sell your startup. You don't do that by just shoving it down people's throat, hoping that they don't suffocate on it.
How do you get in touch with VCs without being bloody annoying? Like,
or with being bloody annoying, but still get actually the contact, right? Because that might sometimes just be the case.
You're essentially, the business metaphor is you're essentially getting into bed with these people. You're going to be talking, like, ideally the business goes well. You'll be dependent on the VC funds. The time horizon in Web3 is 3 years, but 3 to 5. That's a relationship, right? Like you've got to not walk up and piss them off as a first impression.
Little fun fact for trivia night: the average startup founder-investor relationship lasts longer than the average marriage. So just keep that in mind.
That's great.
At least in the US, maybe the US is a bit more trigger-happy with divorces. I mean, it probably would make a lot of lawyers around here happy, but anyways, that's a different story. No, but you're absolutely right. Like, ideally, your investor is like sort of like a buddy, mentor, advisor, and has your success in their best interest because they invest money in you. So it should be a mutually beneficial relationship. And how to find them is, well, here is where it gets a bit weird. So if you look at social media, usually people post success stories on social media, right? It's like all great. It's like, this amazing unicorn world. We are all living in paradise world. It's all happy. Now, if you're living in one of the startup hotspots, then it usually is going to networking events, immersing in the ecosystem, knowing other founders. By the way, don't be a transactional asshole. Like, I have to say it like that. Like, if you only go into an ecosystem when you need something from the ecosystem, you probably won't get far. You have to give a lot to get something back. And for that reason, you also should connect and immerse yourself with other founders. Not only will they help you with viable lessons that they learned themselves to prevent you from maybe making the same mistakes, but they might also connect you with people if they like you. So splurge in the ecosystem, prepare to give something to the ecosystem and not only take from it. So that's step number one. Step number two, if you don't live where the ecosystem is, if you're really serious about building a startup, you might want to consider moving to an ecosystem that has a densely knit network of founders, investors, because venture capital is a relationship business. It just is that way. Like, yes, it is financially driven, and yes, there are some analytical facts to it, but usually in early stages specifically, it's more of an art than a science, and it's a lot about people. You invest in founders, you invest in the founding team if you're an early stage investor. And the only way to really get a read on a founder or founding team is by actually interacting with them. So that's where usually these warm intros and like these terms that you see hover around everywhere come from. But don't be fooled, even with warm intros, it's a brutal market, right? Like, the venture game is a game of probability, and it's a game of outliers if you run a fund. So you definitely have higher chances of hearing a no than a yes if you approach an investor. So that's just a reality. Don't be discouraged by that. Keep building, be resilient. And ideally, if you hear a no, maybe ask why, because maybe you get some good insights into what you have to improve to maybe turn some no's into yeses. But generally, what you should avoid, there's two ways: the warm intro that we spoke about, what you should do, we also spoke about to get those warm intros, right? But if you're doing cold outreach, generally everyone would discourage you from just doing cold outreach and relying on it, because your chances of getting a no are even higher than with warm intros. But if you're doing it, maybe some basic tips of not annoying founders with like, let's say, the first investors with the first message. One, if you're doing it on LinkedIn, starting with a little bit of praise, good faith, that usually might work well. You only have a limited amount of characters in your first LinkedIn message. So maybe don't start immediately selling shit to people with your first message. So that's a general rule of thumb in life. If you approach a stranger, don't just focus on selling them their shit. Like, no one likes that. I mean, come on, like, you don't even like that yourself, right? Like, so why would you do that to someone else? Another big no-no, especially on LinkedIn, is coming into the conversation with like this great, I love what you're doing, synergetical, have a conversation. And it's always the same shit. Like, you get that message, wait for a day, and then one day later, you basically get this text vomiting message that basically has like a full paragraph full of, we're building this, we're looking for capital, it's so amazing. Yeah. And unfortunately, 80% of the time, it's completely off thesis. It's absolutely, like, at least in my case, it's something that is absolutely not relevant for me.
Yeah. They did no research behind the person they've just networked towards. Yeah, this is a big issue in this market.
Thank you. That was like, I was trying to segue into exactly that. Like, if you don't know the other person, at least do a minimum amount of research about that person and find out what they're looking into. And that also applies for face-to-face. So another big no-no, and I actually just recently posted about that because I genuinely want to help founders like not do that, because first impressions matter, let's face it, right? It is sort of like dating. So if you completely mess up the first impression, you might just not get a second chance. That's the unfortunate reality. And if you meet someone face-to-face in person, try to be charming. Like, it's sort of like a game of seduction almost, right? Like, because you are trying to sell something, you're trying to sell your startup, and you don't do that by just shoving it down people's throat, hoping that they don't suffocate on it. You do it by actually finding out why they might be interested in hearing more about your startup. And I think one of the first questions that you can do at networking events, if you are like meeting an investor, actually ask them about their interests. Maybe even ask them a personal question, like, just be a normal human being that tries to have a conversation with another human being, and like not cut straight to like business and just be completely transactional. Mm. The worst thing that can happen to you, and I've had this on a couple of occasions, is So here's really the worst case scenario, right? So I'm creating a story that includes all the things you should avoid. So people are talking at a network event. First, you interrupt the conversation, you just burst in. Secondly, you don't even care about what the person does. You don't even ask them any question. You just immediately start vomiting your startup pitch into their face. And you do a 5-minute monologue without any pause. And after that 5-minute monologue, you wait for a reaction. And at that point, the reaction might very well be, sorry, this is just not an area that is interesting for me, right? Like, it's completely different vertical, wrong stage. Can be a couple of reasons that disqualify a startup right from the get-go. And there's nothing personal in that. Also, for us, don't take that personal. It's not against you as a person, but like, investors have to focus on a specific vertical, stage, area, whatever. They can't invest in everything, right? Because you can't be an expert at everything.
Yeah.
And then after those 5 minutes, when you finally have a chance to have a dialogue, you maybe tell them in a nice way, sorry, this is just not for me. Really appreciate it. Great job. Maybe you should talk to this person. Usually you try to be helpful and like direct them to someone else that might be interested or where it might be relevant. The worst thing that it can do if that happens is you just one-up it and say like, well, but maybe I can twist it around so that it's relevant for you. And that happens actually pretty frequently, right? They sort of like try to then spin a narrative around their startup that makes it appealing to you, even though you just told them it's really not relevant for me. That's bad, because it's also not good use of your own time. And it might actually annoy the other person even more. But it
also looks bad on you, right? Like, I mean, you're selling without data. And if you sell without data, that's one thing. But then selling and like changing your narrative, the narrative that you believe in order to get money, that's kind of like selling yourself out.
Yeah.
To get money. It will never, even if it works in the short term, it will never work in the long term, because it's not built on the relationship, right?
I would totally agree. I would say it doesn't work at all. because
No.
you're showing zero conviction in your idea. Like, it's just like, yeah. Oh no, it does this. It does what you want. Like, oh man. Like, doesn't
Wait,
work.
it really does an OnlyFans for hamsters? Wow, that's amazing. Like, that's exactly what I wanted to start. Like, Series B? Wow, amazing.
So to summarize, it's don't be a taker. Build a karma bank. Add. Bring value. Engross yourself in an ecosystem if you're really serious about it and you have the capability. Move closer to an ecosystem so you can up your frequency of exposure to it. Invert and think about all the things you don't like when people are trying to sell you something, and do not do those things. And stick to your guns. Like, you will get a lot of no's. I think there's an article I read recently by YC, which was on average you're going to get 77 no's before you get a yes, just to make it real, tangible. 77 no's. That's 77, if you're lucky, 15 to 20 minute meetings for a no. And to Sebastian's point, ask why. Every interaction is an opportunity to learn why. Don't lose that opportunity. And Sebastian, investor relationships are how much longer than marriages? Do we have the figures?
Yeah, I mean, let's just say you're really going in early stage, right? So you probably stay connected with your investor for at least 5 to 7 years. Now we could be funny and look up how long the average marriage is in the US. But it must be shorter than that.
I'm pretty sure the last 10 years that average was dropped steeply. So